As the US mulls expanding its travel ban to 36 more countries, Nigeria has issued a stark warning. The nation says the US could face retaliatory action and risk losing access to strategic minerals in...
The United States is preparing to ban 36 more countries from entering, including 25 African nations and Nigeria, the continent's largest powerhouse. But this time, Africa isn't staying silent. Nigeria has issued a chilling warning. Ban our people and we'll ban your minerals. But why would America risk losing access to the very resources that power its tech, energy, and defense industries? Let's find out. It wasn't the first time the US imposed travel restrictions. But something about this list was different, colder, broader, and far more symbolic. 36 nations were reportedly being considered for entry bans. 25 of them are African. And standing at the center of that list, like a red target, was Nigeria. This wasn't just about immigration anymore. It was a map of exclusion. The official reason? Security concerns. That's the phrase the US has leaned on before. Vague enough to sound credible, flexible enough to fit any agenda. But this time, even seasoned diplomats raised their eyebrows. No insurgent attacks, no urgent crisis, no meaningful spike in visa fraud, just a sweeping decision to lock out entire populations, engineers, scholars, tech workers, and students alike. The deeper truth? This wasn't about security, it was about control. And Nigeria knew it. As Africa's most influential nation, by population, GDP, and cultural reach, Nigeria's inclusion on the list didn't feel like a coincidence. It felt like a signal to the continent. Your influence is growing too fast. Your independence is becoming inconvenient. And your shift toward multipolar alliances, BRICS, China, Russia, is starting to rattle the old world order. Behind closed doors, Washington's strategic planners have watched Nigeria with increasing discomfort. The country has been building refineries in partnership with China, signing bilateral currency agreements that bypass the US dollar, exploring tech alliances in Asia, and most recently, consolidating its control over rare earth minerals, the same ones American companies desperately need for batteries, semiconductors, and renewable tech. So when the US dropped news of a travel ban expansion, it wasn't just a bureaucratic move, it was a geopolitical chess play, a move to pressure, isolate, and weaken rising African autonomy. But the calculation was off, because while Washington expected quiet compliance, perhaps a statement, perhaps a shrug, what it got instead was a threat. Nigeria didn't ask for talks, it didn't beg for an exemption. It responded like a nation that understood its worth, a nation holding cards the world can't afford to ignore. The ban may have been written in ink, but the retaliation? It would be delivered in metal, the kind buried under African soil and embedded in every phone, drone, car, and missile on Earth. And that's where the game changed. Because this wasn't just a diplomatic standoff. It was a collision between old assumptions and new power. A reminder that Africa, and Nigeria in particular, is not just a recipient of global decisions, but a maker of them. And the travel ban? It had just awakened a sleeping trade weapon. So the question now isn't just why did the US do it? It's this. What happens when the world's richest supply of minerals decides it's tired of being taken for granted? Nigeria could have issued a strongly worded letter and moved on. That's what global powers usually expect from countries in the global south. Polite disappointment, followed by silent acceptance. But this time, Nigeria answered policy with power. Shortly after reports of the expanded US travel ban broke, Nigeria's Foreign Minister Yusuf Tuggar didn't call for talks. He issued a warning. Not a threat dressed in diplomatic vagueness, but a direct message. If America shuts out Nigerians, Nigeria can shut off the minerals America desperately needs. And suddenly, the discussion shifted, from passports to processing plants, from embassies to electric vehicles. Because Nigeria isn't just a large country, it's a gateway to the mineral wealth of West Africa. It sits on top of untapped reserves of lithium, cobalt, niobium, and tantalum, metals so critical to modern life that a single embargo could send global markets spinning. The same minerals that power electric cars, smartphones, solar panels, military drones, and artificial intelligence servers. The US, the Department of Energy, has quietly labeled many of Nigeria's key exports as strategic and irreplaceable. So when Nigeria hinted at limiting American access to these resources, the impact wasn't symbolic. It was economic warfare, executed through the very arteries of the global tech ecosystem. And this is where Nigeria's genius lies. It didn't retaliate emotionally. It retaliated logically. After all, what does it mean for a country to say, "Your people can't enter," while still expecting to extract the raw materials from their land? Tugger flipped the logic. If you restrict human access, don't expect material access either. But this wasn't just about denying ore shipments or shutting down a mine. Nigeria, and by extension West Africa, knows its true strength lies not just in extraction, but in leverage through supply chains. It understands that the world has begun a once-in-a-century transition toward green energy and digital infrastructure. And the fuel for that transition isn't oil anymore. It's lithium, cobalt, and rare earths. Nigeria is watching the West scramble for alternatives to Chinese supply chains, watching Europe chase new energy sources, watching America pass law after law trying to secure critical materials. And it's realized that something crucial. The world can't move forward without Africa, and Africa doesn't have to move with the West. Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. By linking mineral access to immigration respect, Nigeria reframed the debate. It wasn't about security anymore. It became about reciprocity. A simple question hung in the air. If we're not good enough to enter your airports, why should our minerals power your economy? That question hit Washington harder than any protest ever could. And it didn't stop there. Nigeria hinted that it wouldn't act alone. In mining conferences, side events, and diplomatic whispers, conversations began about a new approach to resource nationalism, where African nations could begin coordinating access policies in unison. The message was subtle but clear. If one nation's minerals can become leveraged, imagine what happens when 15 nations act as one. Which leads to a deeper possibility. What if Nigeria's defiance inspires a regional front? Because minerals don't need visas. But if they're denied, the consequences travel far. And now, all eyes are on West Africa. The question isn't whether Nigeria can hold the line, it's whether the entire region might rise behind it. What began as a US-Nigeria standoff quickly evolved into something far more formidable. Because Nigeria didn't stand alone for long. Across West Africa, in quiet corridors of power and buzzing regional forums, the message resonated. If they can do this to Nigeria, they can do it to any of us. That's when ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, entered the arena. For years, the 15-member bloc has focused on economic integration, regional peacekeeping, and development. Rarely does it challenge global superpowers on matters of immigration policy. But this time was different. ECOWAS released a statement that didn't sound like a plea. It sounded like a position of collective strength. The bloc warned that the proposed US travel restrictions would not only damage relations with Nigeria, but also undermine the entire region's economic future. It condemned the move as a barrier to development and a contradiction to the principles of mutual respect and cooperation. But this wasn't just a diplomatic note, it was the start of a regional realignment. Behind the scenes, ECOWAS officials began reviewing how visa bans could affect cross-border projects funded or supported by the US. Power corridors, digital infrastructure, and mineral corridors stretching from Nigeria to Niger, from Ghana to Guinea. If the US could isolate one nation with a single policy decision, what safeguards were there for the rest? And then came the turning point. Multiple ECOWAS members, including Senegal, Burkina Faso, and Sierra Leone, began discussing the possibility of collective mineral negotiation frameworks, policies that would allow West African countries to coordinate their export conditions, set regional pricing, and, crucially, determine who gets access and who doesn't. In simpler terms, if you isolate one of us, we decide together what you lose. This was unprecedented. For decades, African nations have been picked off one by one in global trade, negotiated separately, pressured individually. But the travel ban made it clear. Unity wasn't just ideological, it was strategic. Regional solidarity could become economic defense, and it wasn't just about minerals. ECOWAS began looking at the bigger picture. What if US universities suddenly saw a 40% drop in West African students? What if remittances slowed? What if US firms trying to expand in Africa found themselves stuck in a bureaucratic maze? The most powerful element in all of this wasn't just what ECOWAS was saying, it was what others started whispering in response. Because in Beijing, Delhi, and even Ankara, diplomats noticed the opening. China's Belt and Road envoys began soft-courting the same countries on the US list. India's foreign ministry floated visa cooperation pacts in African embassies. Turkey's foreign investors offered regional digital infrastructure plans that would bypass Western systems altogether. The message from the global South was growing louder. If the West turns its back, we won't stand alone. We'll stand together, and we won't stand still. ECOWAS leaders, often overshadowed in global affairs, suddenly found themselves in a powerful position. They weren't just reacting to America's policies. They were shaping Africa's terms of engagement on visas, minerals, and respect. And that's where this crisis becomes something much bigger than a list of banned passports. Because when a region decides to link identity with industry, people with power and sovereignty with resources, a new framework is born. And it's one the US didn't see coming. So what happens when this regional unity begins affecting something bigger than diplomacy, like global supply chains and the fate of America's tech future? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. By the time ECOWAS had declared its stance, it wasn't just governments that were paying attention, it was the world's markets. A visa ban meant to stifle migration was now threatening something far more volatile: the global flow of critical minerals. And for the first time, CEOs in Silicon Valley and policy hawks in Washington had to face a possibility they hadn't seriously considered before. What if Africa stopped shipping? The problem wasn't that a few mines might shut down, the problem was interdependence. The modern global economy isn't built on finished goods, it's built on the silent, invisible movement of raw materials. Lithium, cobalt, graphite, niobium, tantalum. The very ingredients of tomorrow's economy are scattered across the soil of West Africa, and the world doesn't work without them. For years, the US has known this. That's why it has passed bill after bill aimed at diversifying supply chains away from China. It has funded research into African mining zones. It has courted new governments and offered incentives to tech firms that source responsibly. But it never planned for this, an entire region threatening to limit access not because of war, or corruption, or instability, but as a response to a diplomatic insult. Imagine this chain reaction. A tech giant in California delayed its next-gen smartphone release because a critical metal shipment from Nigeria was frozen for re-evaluation. A battery factory in Michigan misses quarterly production targets because Ghana's graphite export policy is being reviewed by a new ECOWAS oversight committee. A solar firm in Nevada scrambles to renegotiate supply contracts after Mali tightens its licensing for rare earth elements. And all of this was triggered not by a natural disaster or market collapse, but by a visa decision. The irony was cruel. In trying to control who could enter the United States, the US was now on the verge of being locked out of the very materials that make its industries run. Even worse, this wasn't just about supply, it was about optics. How do you continue telling the world that you're investing in Africa's growth and respecting African partners while simultaneously banning their citizens en masse? The contradiction couldn't hold. Investors began to ask hard questions. Would US-Africa trade agreements still be honored? Would local resentment slow down joint ventures? Could rival powers swoop in while Washington's relationships froze? And that's exactly what began to happen. Chinese-backed firms started sending fast-track proposals for mineral processing plants in Burkina Faso and Sierra Leone. Indian trade envoys arrived in Nigeria with updated investment terms. Even Russia, historically sidelined in West African economic circles, offered transport and security infrastructure deals to move minerals across inland routes without US reliance. America had spent years trying to reduce its dependence on China. But in pushing Africa away, it might have accelerated China's dominance instead, and the mineral markets reacted. Prices for niobium ticked upward, lithium futures began to shift, and in hushed boardrooms, analysts warned that a prolonged disruption from West Africa, just 3 to 6 months, could have cascading effects on tech stocks, defense contracts, and green energy benchmarks. Because minerals don't just sit in the ground, they have momentum. When they move, factories move. When they stop, economies slow. And when an entire continent begins rethinking who gets access, the world starts to listen. But there's one more shift still coming, and it's not economic, it's ideological. Because beneath the mineral talks and trade graphs lies a deeper transformation. Africa is no longer asking for a seat at the table, it's building its own. For decades, Africa was expected to show up, shake hands, accept the terms, and say thank you. Global summits were staged with grand welcomes, polite photo ops, and scripted speeches about partnership. But when the United States threatened to slam its doors shut on 25 African nations, including Nigeria, it accidentally tore the illusion apart. The message was clear. We'll take your resources, but we don't want your people. That insult didn't just spark anger. It ignited clarity. From Lagos to Bamako, from Niamey to Freetown, leaders began saying what had long been whispered behind closed doors. Africa no longer needs to beg for inclusion. It can shape the system. And that shift, from asking for a seat at someone else's table to building its own, has now begun in real time. You could feel it in Nigeria's bold response, yes. But the deeper current is broader. It's structural. It's philosophical. African leaders are finally confronting a truth they've always known but rarely acted on. Ownership is more powerful than access. Why fight for visas when you own the minerals? Why negotiate terms when you set them? This is where the US may have miscalculated most. It treated Africa as a region still dependent on Western validation, on aid, on military ties, on university exchanges. But it forgot the raw reality of the 21st century. Africa is the world's final frontier of resource power. Not just in terms of volume, but in timing. The global green transition, the AI revolution, the electric vehicle surge, they all need Africa's minerals to exist. And now, the continent knows it. That realization is fueling a series of silent revolutions. One of them is a rethinking of diplomacy. African nations are beginning to treat trade deals, visa agreements, and investment talks as unified leverage points rather than isolated silos. That means if you insult one, you may get a coordinated response from many. Another is structural sovereignty. Nigeria and its ECOWAS allies have begun exploring domestic processing of minerals instead of exporting raw materials. Why send lithium ore to Europe only to buy back the battery at 10 times the price? Why let Western firms dictate pricing and timelines when African labs can train their geologists and engineers? That's the new model. And it's not aspirational anymore. It's operational. Burkina Faso is building its first state-run gold refinery. Guinea is rewriting its mining code to prioritize value retention. Mali, Niger, and Nigeria are in talks to establish a shared mineral logistics hub that would route exports through intra-African corridors, instead of colonial-era ports built for European extraction. This is what a new table looks like. Not a place to be invited to, but a platform where rules are made, value is retained, and sovereignty is real. And that's not the end of the shift. It's only the beginning. The Global South is watching closely. BRICS nations are welcoming these moves with open arms. China, for all its faults, has at least offered infrastructure for access, not just conditions for approval. India is increasing African student visas and offering scholarships, while America restricts them. Even Turkey and Iran are reaching out with trade deals that bypass the dollar and open new channels of cooperation. The US, once seen as the dream destination, is now being seen as a gatekeeper standing behind walls. Its soft power is leaking, not leading. This isn't just a warning shot, it's a tectonic shift. It's Africa saying, we've been patient, polite, and cooperative, and you still shut the door. So now we'll walk another path, one where we decide who enters. So where does that leave the world? It leaves America at a crossroads. It can continue down the road of exclusion, betting that supply chains won't break, that alliances won't fracture, and that African anger won't last. Or it can recalibrate, not out of guilt, but out of necessity. Because the era of silent extraction is over. The age of passive diplomacy is dead. Africa is no longer a pawn, it's a power broker. And power brokers don't knock. They build doors. Do you think the travel bans did any harm to Africa? Will Trump regret it? Let us know in the comment section. Is it too late to repent? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.